You're listening to the Empowered Divorce Podcast, where you practice being the chooser in your life again, one day at a time. Thanks for joining me. Hello, my amazing, beautiful listeners. Welcome. Thank you for coming back. Thank you for coming back after last week's episode. If you haven't listened to last week's, maybe hit that one first. This is a continuance of what we talked about last week. We talked about guilt, talked about faults, responsibility, and why perhaps so many of you are grieving instead of raging through this process. Today, we're going in a little bit deeper. We're going to talk about acceptance. And I want to be very upfront with you before we even get started. I think this one is just as tender as last week's. This one might even be the hardest of the two, because last week we talked about feelings, and feelings, while painful, are something we understand. We know what it looks like to cry, to grieve, to feel guilty. But what the heck does acceptance look like? Acceptance is asking you to do something. And what it's asking you to do might be one of the hardest things that you have ever faced in your entire life, or it's asking you to do something that you didn't sign up for when you signed up to get married. Maybe there was an understanding when you originally got married that when you had children, your job was going to be in the home raising the children, not outside the home working. And so if part of acceptance means you are now working outside the home, this is going to be extremely hard. I know I've mentioned this before. This right here was one of those moments in my life that I didn't think I was going to get through. I literally remember I can pull up the memory so quickly in my mind of being in my parents' bedroom the night before this really big interview I had for a job. I just threw myself on the floor and sobbed and sobbed and sobbed because this isn't what I wanted. And the dream, the role, all of it, it just felt like there's no way I can accept that this is what I'm going to be doing now. I'm going to ask you to stay with me and hang in there with me with this episode. Even if what I say today isn't fully landing for you yet, that is seriously okay. I have said this several times. I want you to hear it anyway, because sometimes we need those seeds planted for us even before the ground is ready. It still really matters. There were so many times where a seed would be planted and be like, ooh, that I don't like, even though I know it's probably right. I don't like it, but I know that it's there. I know that it's available when I'm ready. And that might be this episode for some of you today. And that's okay. I also want you to know that if your body starts to tighten when you hear the word acceptance, if there's that resistance, that bracing and armoring against it, that's okay too. Doesn't mean that you're like totally failing at acceptance. I, again, really see this from that nervous system perspective. It is protecting you, and maybe it's protecting you from moving faster than you have the capacity to do right now. And I would just say, let's listen to that. I don't see acceptance just as this mental decision. Okay, I just have to think differently about this. It has to be a whole system thing, because the whole system has to hold this. Now, I ended last week's episode with this a little bit, but I'm going to reiterate it because I think it needs to be reiterated so many times. When we think of the word acceptance, it has often been weaponized against grieving people. Oftentimes we hear is, you need to accept this. You need to be okay with this. You need to stop being upset. You need to move on. You need to agree that what happened is fine. That is not what acceptance means. And that's not what I'm talking about today. I don't think that's ever what it's supposed to mean. In fact, Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, who gave us the 5 stages of grief, described acceptance not as approval, but as acknowledgement. Big difference. It's the moment where we stop fighting reality, not because reality is good or fair or we love it or like it, but because fighting against it is costing so much. Some of you, it's costing you everything. Acceptance is not surrender either. I look at it as a decision to stop spending your energy arguing with what already is. So after Elizabeth Kubler-Ross passed away, David Kessler, who worked alongside her, they both wrote that book on grief and grieving. Elizabeth passed away, and David wrote another book with the last stage of grief. I think it's one of the most important books I've ever read around this stage, but it's called Finding Meaning. He took this acceptance, I think, a step further. What he proposed is the sixth stage of grief that goes beyond acceptance. The stage is meaning. Because here's what Kessler said: grief doesn't have to end with acceptance, it can move into something more, not instead of the pain, not instead of the pain, but alongside it. Doesn't that feel like I just exhale when I hear that? Finding that meaning doesn't ask you to stop hurting. When we find meaning in what happened, in our pain, in our hurt, in our grief, it's not saying stop grieving. I think what it's really saying is, what do you do with what happened? Not, why did this happen to me? That I think we can get stuck, because I don't know if our brain will ever really find the quote right answer to that. Certainly not an answer. At least I'll speak for myself. Not an answer that I liked. It kept me spinning. It kept me stuck when I was coming at it from, why did this happen? Why did this happen? Why did this happen to me? I did all the right things. I did right. The shift is, what do I do with what happened? What gets to be true now for me because I went through this, because I lived through this? That is a totally different question. And I think it's one, when you're ready, can put you into that empowered divorce chooser state. I'm going to go into the tender place that I mentioned before. When we talk about divorce, yes, there is a huge, big loss: the marriage, the partnership, the future you imagined. And we expect to grieve that. What I don't think we prepared for, and I'll genderize, as women enough, are those secondary losses, the ones that come after and after and after, and sometimes years after, the ones that weren't in the plan. Having, like I mentioned, having to go back to work when you didn't think you have to. Maybe you're stepping back from your career. Maybe you stayed home. Maybe you built your life around the financial partnership that is now dissolving. And the reality you're staring at is, I have to support myself, my children, in a way that I was not prepared for. That's a real loss. It's way more than just inconvenient. It can shake your identity, your competence, your confidence, your safety. Like, that's significant. Maybe you're having to move. Gosh, leaving my state that I loved, leaving my house, leaving my land, leaving my garden, leaving so many things that I blood, sweat, and tears in. So much grief there. Maybe it's the house you raised your kids in. Maybe it's the neighborhood that you love, the community that you felt safe in and even maybe contributed to building, the school district that you maybe fought to get your kids into. Maybe you've homeschooled and now you've got to put your kids in school. I know some of you are having to move back somewhere you thought you'd left, a smaller place. Gosh, living in an apartment with 4 kids, not what I had in mind, not what I had in my plans. Will it feel like home when it's not our home? That grief is real. The loss of physical place, the loss of memory, routine, the nervous system stability, not having your kids full time. Oh my gosh, that wasn't in the plan. I want to be really careful here, because I know that this cuts deep for a lot of you. If you are a mother who has always had her children with her full time, and your partner even supported that, wanted that, it was agreed upon. He may even said he loved it. And now he's fighting for all of it, half of it, custody arrangement where they're somewhere else, not with you. That grief doesn't have adequate language. It is visceral. It is physical. And the first time that your house is quiet, when it's supposed to have children in it, is a moment that stays with you. These are the losses that can keep people stuck in what looks like a refusal to accept. So I want to say this as clearly as I can. If you feel stuck here, it does not mean you're broken. And that is not the message I want to give. Often it just means your nervous system is overwhelmed, exhausted, depleted from holding too much for too long. So these stages of grief that Elizabeth Kubler-Ross developed, created, brought to light in our awareness was never, and she says it right in the beginning of her book. She's like, this is not a checklist. This is not linear. She said it repeatedly in the book. We're not checking off those grief stages. You don't move through denial and then anger and then bargaining and then depression and then acceptance as the tidy bow end of the line. You loop back and you weave in and out and you get to maybe what feels like acceptance. And then something happens, court date, a birthday, dropping kids off, signing the legal document or getting that in the mail that it's all signed and you're officially divorced, or you drive by the old house, or they get the new girlfriend. And then we're right back in anger, denial, bargaining. You feel like you're right back in the thick of it. That's not going backwards. That's not you doing it wrong. That is grief being grief. If you listened to last week's episode and you thought, okay, I'm in grief, so I must be getting close to acceptance. I super love the optimism, genuinely, but I also want to give you permission to not rush this, not think that you should be somewhere other than where you are. There really is only through it as it moves through you. And through it happens in your nervous system as it can tolerate it. So going back to what I offered last week in that window, creating pockets and windows of time in that window of tolerance. Sometimes people stay in a place that looks like grief, but honestly, over time, it starts to feel more like who they are. We're identifying with it. So where the anger, the victimhood, the resistance to accepting reality becomes the story they lived inside, not because they chose it, but because it's what feels familiar. It's what feels safe. It's what their system knows. And because accepting reality would require them to start making different choices. Now we're going back to all of those choices and then some that I mentioned just a minute ago that we didn't want to make, that isn't fair. We didn't ask. There's a very real acceptance in that in of itself, that you didn't ask for that. When someone starts talking about acceptance, it's going to bump up against it. It's going to be like, well, I didn't effing ask for that to begin with. So don't tell me that I should accept it. Right? And yeah, I'm not. And making different choices requires energy, and accepting reality requires us to make different choices. When the person in our life made different choices than we ever thought they would make. And making different choices requires energy that you might not freaking have right now. Or you might not have the confidence to do that thing that feels lost. You might not trust in the future because of everything that has been shattered. Sometimes we just need to step into a place of rest first, because that acceptance is going to require some energy. Without attaching any shame to this, being in victim is very understandable, and staying in that place, not my fault, not fair, shouldn't ever, I'll never, staying in that place, so understandable after betrayal trauma and a life-saving divorce. Number one, it saves energy because you don't have to do the thing. When someone does something terrible to you, being the person who is wronged by that is very accurate. It is true. Yes. Where I see the problem is when that story is the only story. When it becomes the ceiling, we just keep bumping our head up against that ceiling rather than it being the starting point. Acceptance doesn't erase what's happened. It doesn't forgive automatically. And it is certainly as hell not minimizing any of the damage. I see it as creating space for agency to come back online. When we're victimized, that word means something happened that you didn't choose. Then we step into choice. When do we do that? I think everyone's going to decide that in their own time. The reason why I do episodes like this is because sometimes we're not aware or see that we are stuck in the victim's story. We're bumping up against that ceiling and we're not looking at it as a starting point. When we can look at it that way, it allows you to move from this happened to me to this happened. Now I get to decide what happens next. That's the becoming the chooser in your life right there. How long it takes you to get there, I don't think anyone should tell you what that looks like. I just want you to know what that looks like. For you to be a little bit more radically honest with yourself about maybe where you are in that process. Because finding meaning can sound really abstract if we're not careful. If we were to make this a little bit more concrete, a little more tangible, finding meaning doesn't mean that you are grateful that you have to be grateful your marriage ended. Maybe it sounds something like finding meaning is the woman who had to go back to work and discover that she is more capable than she ever gave herself credit for. That career that she's building now is hers in a way that nothing ever was before. Maybe finding meaning sounds like the woman who had to move and finds that the smaller house or apartment with her 4 children is a fresh start. It's quieter, it's simpler. In the most ironic way, it's what her 4 children talk about most fondly. For the first time in years, she can breathe in her own space and sleep in the middle of her bed with all pillows surrounding spread out. Maybe it's the mother who cries every time that she drops off her kids, who then learns to use those hours for herself in ways that actually make her a more present mother when they come back. Finding meaning might be the woman who starts to understand that her kids seeing her rebuild her life is one of the most empowering things that she can model for them. Finding meaning is the woman who spent 2 years, 3 years in anger and in fight, who wakes up one morning and realizes she's tired, not defeated, just tired of the person who she's had to be in that battle. And so she decides she wants to find out who she is when she's not fighting anymore. She lets go of the rope. None of these are pretty. None of these are fun. This is messy. None of them arrive in this place without grief either. But all of those are examples of meaning being made from something that should have never have had to happen. So, for the you who is listening, whether you feel close to acceptance or nowhere freaking near it, you don't have to be ready for acceptance today. You don't even have to be at meaning making. I would invite you to be willing to just acknowledge that it exists. That's it. That's the ask for today. If you're someone who wants one small thing to try to practice, like I say, not homework, no pressure, just to practice, notice one place in your life this week where you are already coping better than you were 6 months ago. Not perfectly and not completely. That's not what I'm saying. Just better than 3 months ago, 6 months ago. Just a little better. Because acceptance is going to start there. It's not going to start with peace and joy. It's going to start with evidence. So let's just find the evidence this week. We covered 2 really hard episodes back to back. If you are feeling, like I said, a little cracked open, it means I think some truth was touched. And truth, even though it's really painful, I know healing grows from that. I am so genuinely proud of all of you who get on with the intent to learn and to grow and to step into having an empowered divorce. It is hard freaking work. Life is hard. You are doing hard and you can do hard things. Today, if that landed hard, maybe share it with someone that feels safe to share it with. Grief is not linear. Acceptance does not mean approval. Meaning is something that you make. Healing is something you build while the hard thing is still happening. You are the chooser in your life. And even inside circumstances that you did not choose, you still get to choose the direction, that next right step, just right now, because you can. Take care of everything.